For more on this story, let's go to Ahmed Kaballo. He's a Sudan affairs analyst and joins us live from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Ahmed, welcome. So we've just been hearing about the drone attack that's occurred by the RSF after the Sudanese army moved into the city of Kadugli. What do you make of these developments?
Well, it shows that for the RSF, they're willing to use the civilians as a bartering tool to advance their aims. The motivation behind the attack seems to be that civilians came out to celebrate the army retaking Kadugli, much like what happened in Delinj, where when the army retook, drone strikes against civilian areas began to emerge. So just like we saw in Al-Fasher, just like we saw in the siege in Delinj and Kadugli, they're willing to use the civilians as part of a bartering negotiations that they can use their ally, their principal backer, the UAE, to push through via the format of the Quad, to try and get Sudan, the Sudanese army, to negotiate on terms that are favourable to the RSF and their backers.
Looking more broadly at the civil war after the developments of the Sudanese army breaking the siege of Kadugli, do you think that this could shift the balance of power in favour of the army, or where do things stand with the two sides?
Well, it's a great question because I don't think it's a coincidence that the Sudanese army's victories have come just after we've seen intense tensions between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in Yemen. It feels like that Saudi Arabia is using its diplomatic pressure to try and weaken the supply route to the RSF. And we've said from the beginning, people that have followed this conflict, that the RSF is only able to engage in this rebellion, only able to successfully take towns and cities because of the support, the logistical support, the financial support, and the military support it receives from the UAE via places like Chad, the UAE, places like Chad, Ethiopia, and South Sudan, and allegedly also Uganda. If we can somehow stop that supply chain, we'll see the RSF lose more battles. And there's no evidence because, of course, we don't know what's happening with these supply chains. Usually it's done in the dark. But I don't think it's a coincidence that as tensions are flaring, as the UAE is becoming more isolated because of its actions in southern Yemen, we're seeing battlefield losses for the RSF.
Speaking of the role of international actors, I mean, how do those external backers, regional powers with differing influences, impact the prospects for peace or prolonging of the battle?
Well, so the Sudanese army has made its point very clearly. It says it will not negotiate peace. It will not sacrifice Sudanese blood while the RSF controls civilian areas. And why does it say that? Because we see when it does control civilian areas, we see massacres like we saw in Al-Fasher, where you could see scenes of blood, of massacres from space. We've seen a siege in Kadugli and Delinj, where the UN reported last year that there was a famine. We've seen videos of people eating leaves, people dying from poison, from things that they're finding in the nearby forest just to survive. So this is the reason why they're not willing to accept any sort of peace negotiation, which allows the RSF to continue to control cities and towns, which will be at the detriment of Sudanese civilians in those areas. So if that's the case, then the only way forward is the Sudanese victory. And how can the Sudanese army advance if the RSF is constantly being resupplied, rearmed, and financed from abroad? So the only way this war can end, if the Sudanese army is not willing to negotiate, is if somehow the supply chains that allow the RSF to continue this war, to continue its sieges, continue drone strikes into civilian areas stops. And that can only happen through international pressure on its principal backer, the United Arab Emirates.
Ahmed Kaballo, Sudan affairs analyst, thank you so much for your time and analysis.